Hi, I'm Wes Allen with DM Tales, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the core mechanic for the upcoming game by Darrington Press, Daggerheart. Let's roll it. So Daggerheart has an interesting take on how action rolls work inside the game. It is an interesting blend of more crunchy systems, like you would get with the classic D20 concept, and more narrative-based systems like you would get with Powered by the Apocalypse and those 2d6 rolls. But because it is so distinct and there is a combination of two different styles of play being formed here, I want to go over just a couple of the terms that you're going to use in order to do an action roll. This is not necessarily a good sign for the simplicity of the game, but I do think that it's beneficial, and once you get the terms down, it's pretty easy to follow. Let's take a look at some of these terms. So the first of the key terms is the duality dice. Daggerheart is a 2d12 system, and the d12s each have their own distinct color. They represent different aspects to the character. The first is hope. This represents a character's resolve to overcome obstacles, and the other die represents fear, which represents the obstacles which can shake a character's resolve in order to keep moving forward. So every roll that you take inside the game is always going to use these two d12s. You add them up, but depending on which one is higher, it's going to change a little bit of the outcome, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The second of the terms is something that anyone who's played 5e is very familiar with. There is advantage and disadvantage. Only in this game, it means that you add a d6 to the stock of dice that you roll. It's not necessarily a dice pool system in that you're not trying to roll a bunch of dice and get the same matches or a specific pattern of results inside the dice, but you do stock your roll with a number of dice, and they're all going to be added up to the same total. For advantage and disadvantage, you will add a d6 to your dice stock, and if the result is for advantage, you will add the result to your roll, and if it's for disadvantage, you will subtract it. Pretty simple. Then you've got experiences. Well, experiences are skills that are gleaned from a character's backstory. Usually they give you a +2 or a +1 modifier to the roll. And it can be added to any roll where the GM and the players agree that the situation merits it. Also, you can have multiple experiences that can come into play in a certain situation, so these are always going to be very handy to have. Then you go into things that everyone who's played a role-playing game is pretty much familiar with, and that is class features. These are abilities linked to the character's class. Some come from the main class, others come from the character's subclass, so there's going to be a rather large pool that you can choose from. Sometimes these abilities are going to allow you to add more dice to stock a roll, and when you activate them, one of the key aspects of it is that class abilities can cause stress to the character in order to activate them. This represents the strain that is put on a character's body when they're doing these cool feats. This actually gets tracked on a character sheet, so when the stress meter is full, a character cannot activate any of their class abilities until it is bled off. Gives it a little bit of a resource management flair to it, which is something I always appreciate. I don't like micromanaging games, but I do like games that have really cool meta currencies that you gotta keep track of. How far am I going to be able to go if I keep spending this stuff? It's a cool concept they're going for here. So the rules of the roll are actually rather simple. GM sets a difficulty and then assigns a trait that is going to be used for it. Now, sometimes you're going to come across inside the game a roll that has a specific trait called for and then have its target number next to it, and that is going to take some of the discretion away from the GM, but it's for a very specific situation. A GM can announce the target number if they're picking it as public or private, and that is completely up to the GM's discretion. Sometimes you want a little more tension in how you're going to decide if the players are going to succeed or not, and I kind of like that. A GM may also give characters an option to use one of several traits which can apply to the task, and the player can say, okay, this is something that my character actually leans on more, and so we're going to go with that. And because you're using a different trait, it's actually going to change the in-game narrative a little bit. If you are trying to brute force a door, that's one thing, but if you're trying to intelligently wedge the door open, that's going to be described a completely different way. and I do like the way that there is a narrative feel to this game. Once you have the GM's difficulty set, or if the roll is actually specified on a card, you are going to stock your roll. As we mentioned earlier, you are always going to use your 2 duality dice, and then you are going to apply your advantage or disadvantage dice if it is applicable. After that, you take your dice from any class-linked ability and you make the roll. You add up your duality dice, your other dice, and you apply either advantage or disadvantage if it is appropriate. After you get done adding up all the dice, you add whatever character tokens are there, and if it's negative, as I said, you subtract the number. Finally, you add up the result, you state the number, and also which duality die is higher. So you would say something like, I rolled a 15 with hope, or I rolled a 14 with fear. And just like in many other games, if you meet or beat the target difficulty, the roll succeeds. Yay! But it gets a little bit more nuanced than that, because successes aren't automatically all great and failures are not automatically all terrible. See, if you roll a success and your hope is actually the higher die, it is going to go well with you. Everything is going to work out the way that you had expected, and you will get a hope. That is another meta currency that you can use in the game to affect play. If you have a success with fear, you are going to accomplish what it is that you wanted to accomplish, but there is going to be some accompanying consequence. Some law of unintended consequences is going to come and hurt you, and also the GM is going to get a fear that they can use to impact play later. So there's always this thing, yeah, I succeeded, but you've got something, another meta currency that you can use against me, and I'm a little frightened by that. So failures are similarly tiered. If you fail but your hope die is higher, you will get a consequence to your action, but you will also get a hope, a meta currency you can use for later. If you roll a failure but your fear die is higher, well, then the hammer of consequence comes down and the GM gets a fear, that wonderful meta currency they can use to make your character's life miserable a little bit later on. There is one other alteration, however. If the duality dice rolls a double, the result does not matter. You don't add anything up because it is automatically a critical success. This means that you are going to succeed plus get some narrative benefit inside the game. The player will get a hope, meta currency they can use for later, and also wipe out a stress point. So that's going to allow them to use their abilities a little bit further into the adventure. If you're making an attack roll and you hit a critical success, your attack will do extra damage. And that's basically the core mechanic of the game. It is relatively straightforward. There is a lot of adding of the dice up. There are a lot of moving parts that you have to keep track of, which is why I needed to do the here's what the terms are at the opening of this video. But I like that it is more than a simple yes-no response to rolls. If you succeed, there can be some small little thing that happens. It's going to ruin your day a little bit further on. But if you fail, maybe something's going to fall into place for you a little bit further on that you were not expecting. I kind of like it. So what do I think of the concept as a whole? Well, I won't really know until I get it to a table and play it. However, a friend of mine is planning on running a playtest for Daggerheart, and I'm hoping to get in on that. I want to see how it functions when you're actually around a table rolling some dice, virtual or otherwise. From reading the way things are put together, I do kind of like it. I like the way that it is a hybrid between heavy crunch and that narrative first concept that you see in a lot of games nowadays. I did point out there are a lot of dice and there are a lot of modifiers to add, and there's a lot of moving parts, and that could slow things down a little bit. So I'm a little leery of it on that part, but the nuanced results that and how it impacts both successes and failures, and how that narrates inside the game to change the way things are happening. I kind of like that. That's one of the things that appeals to me about Powered by the Apocalypse games, that all rolls have consequence no matter what you do. There's just not a yes or a no. There's something's going to change because you rolled those dice, and that's really cool. And as I read the Daggerheart playtest materials, I'm getting this impression that the designers of the game sat down to decide which type of game they wanted to play, a swinging mechanic game or a narrative first game, and then someone in the corner just said, hey, why not both of them at the same time, and that's what they decided to do. I will point out that, especially with the way all the class abilities are set up and you have all these cards that are going to change the way your characters are drawing powers from, it might not be my preferred style of fantasy. This real high epic style fantasy is not necessarily my type of game. And it really is because the characters are looking like they're rather powered up right from the jump. But I do think that this game could be a lot of fun to bring to the table, so I'm going to be keeping my eye on it. And like I said, I do want to take part in a playtest at some point in the future. So, coming up, I have got a whole bunch of things on the slate, although this is going to be a rather busy week for me given my vocation, so it's going to be a little bit before I get there. I have got Godforsaken read, and I'm ready to start writing that review. It's a wonderful fantasy supplement that Monte Cook Games sent to me for the Cypher system. Also have The Origin, which is another setting for Cypher systems set in modern day, but it's a really wild twist on things. That one's got me thinking a lot, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that a little bit more. I had the Dragonbane Bestiary that I did a first look for that I do want to do a full review for, and I'm going to be working on that very soon. And I have read, or I'm currently about 2/3 of the way through Shadow Dark, which is a game I absolutely adore. I do want to review that as soon as I can. Eventually, I'm going to get to Forbidden Lands and 36 other games that are on my shelf as well. I got heckin' good Doggos back there. I have Raccoon Sky Pirates, Dark Places and Demogorgons for old school essentials, and Hyperborea. So there's a ton of things on my shelf I have not had a chance to get to yet, and I'm looking forward to getting to all of them. However, if you're in the South Jersey or Philly area, April 12 through 14, come on out to Palmyra, New Jersey for ECCLESICON. We are going to have 3 days of gaming, and it is going to be so much fun. If you can come out for that, I would love to roll some dice with you. But until we see each other again, folks, happy playing, everyone.